Hi everyone, my name is Maya Chen. I'm 34 years old and I want to start by saying something before I tell you any of this. I am not a petty person by nature. I'm not someone who keeps score. I don't believe in making dramatic scenes or burning bridges just to feel some temporary sense of power. I was raised to be quiet and capable and grateful for what I'd built, and for most of my adult life I genuinely believed that hard work done in silence was its own reward. But there is a very specific kind of pain that comes from sitting at a dinner table with people who look at you and see absolutely nothing. People who smile at you the way you smile at a child who says something embarrassing, with a mixture of pity and barely single amusement. And when that happens once, you brush it off. When it happens twice, you make excuses for them. When it happens every single Sunday for 5 years at the same oak dining table, with the same crystal wine glasses and the same perfectly roasted chicken and the same simmering cruelty dressed up as polite concern, well, eventually something shifts. This is the story of what shifted and what happened because of it. Chapter 1. The table, I met Daniel Hargrove when I was 27 years old. He was 30, warm-eyed, funny, in that easy, comfortable way that makes you feel like the funniest person in the room just by being near him. We met at a coffee shop, genuinely not an app, not a swipe, and he spilled his entire Americano while trying to hold the door open for me, and then looked so completely horrified about it that I laughed for a solid 30 seconds. We dated for a year. He was kind, he was thoughtful. He remembered the small things, my favourite tea, which side of the bed I preferred, that I couldn't sit through horror movies but would stay up until 2 a.m, listening to true crime podcasts. I thought I had found someone who actually truly saw me, not the performance of me. We got engaged after 2 years. We celebrated with his family. And that is when I met Patricia and Robert Hargrove. His mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who wore pearl earrings to Sunday brunch and referred to money the way other people refer to weather, casually, constantly, as if it were simply the most natural measuring stick available. She was not unkind in the loud, obvious way. She was unkind in the careful, precise, surgical way, the kind that leaves absolutely no visible marks. The kind that makes you feel slightly crazy for even noticing, because nothing she said was ever technically wrong. His father, Robert, was easier to read in some ways and harder in others. He was dismissive in that old-fashioned, comfortable, unexamined way. The kind of man who simply did not find women in business interesting, who assumed a woman's worth was tied more or less directly to her husband's income bracket, and who could say something like, well, she means well about you, while you were standing 3 feet away. The first Sunday dinner was in October. I brought a bottle of wine, a genuinely good one, a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir I'd read about and saved for something worth opening. I set it on the counter feeling quietly proud of the choice. Patricia picked it up, turned it over, looked at the label with an expression I couldn't quite read, set it back down with a small closed-lip smile and said, "Oh, that's sweet." She opened one of the bottles from their cellar instead. I told myself it wasn't intentional. The second dinner, Robert asked me what I did for work. I told him I was in real estate, deliberately vague, which I'll explain in a moment. He nodded in the way you nod when a child tells you they want to be a professional astronaut, politely, indulgently, and said, "So you're selling houses. That's good for you." Then he turned to talk to Daniel about golf. I didn't correct him. By the third dinner, Patricia had started mentioning Daniel's ex. Her name was Courtney. Apparently she came from what Patricia called a very established family, and had a law degree and a trust fund and cheekbones that Patricia described, without apparent irony, as aristocratic. She brought Courtney up the way you bring up a mutual friend who moved to another city, wistfully, fondly, as though we all missed her together. I noticed the pattern forming around dinner 4 or 5. Patricia would compliment the meal and then add something like, "Courtney used to make the most incredible beef Wellington. Have you ever tried making that, Maya?" She would comment on my earrings, "Oh, vintage? How fun." She would look at my outfits the way a realtor looks at a house in need of updates, taking silent inventory, calculating the distance between what existed and what could theoretically be. And Daniel would sit beside me. He would refill my wine glass and squeeze my knee gently under the table, and then in the car on the drive home he would say things like, "She doesn't mean it like that," or "You know how she is," or "She just takes more time to warm up to people than most." 5 years is a long time to be warming up to someone. Chapter 2. What they saw. Let me tell you what they saw when they looked at me, because it matters to everything that comes after. They saw a woman who drove a sensible, slightly dented, used Honda instead of a luxury car. They saw someone who wore blazers from consignment shops and didn't carry a recognizable designer bag. They saw someone who lived in a modest apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood, who sometimes brought store-brand sparkling water to potlucks and didn't have a family name that opened any doors in their social circle. They saw someone who had grown up the daughter of Chinese immigrants who owned and operated a dry cleaning business in central Ohio. Someone who had put herself through college on academic scholarships and 2 part-time jobs. Someone who had no trust fund, no vacation home, no family legacy to leverage, and no financial safety net other than the one she'd built entirely herself. What they didn't see, what I had carefully, deliberately made sure they would not see, was everything else. I bought my first property at 23 years old. A duplex in a neighborhood that every cautious person I knew said was too risky for someone your age. I had saved every dollar I could since my first real job at 21. Lived with 2 roommates in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, eaten rice and leftovers for dinner 5 nights a week, skipped vacations, skipped new clothes, skipped everything that wasn't strictly necessary, and bought that duplex with a modest down payment, a carefully researched mortgage, and an absolute refusal to let fear make my financial decisions for me. I rented out the top unit, lived in the bottom one, saved the rental income completely, paid down the loan faster than required. 2 years later, I did it again. Small commercial property, 3 blocks from a new transit station that every developer in the city had somehow overlooked, probably because it didn't photograph well, then a 6-unit building, then a 12-unit, then a mixed-use building near the arts district I had watched and waited on for 2 full years before the numbers finally made sense. By 27, when I met Daniel, I had a real estate portfolio of 11 properties and a management company I operated quietly under an LLC. My passive income alone was more than most people made at full-time jobs they'd worked for decades. I had a financial advisor, a tax attorney, and a spreadsheet that documented every acquisition, every return, every projection with meticulous detail. It would have made Robert Hargrove choke on his roasted chicken. But here's why I didn't share it, and I want you to really hear this part. I grew up watching my parents get underestimated every single day of their lives. People spoke slowly at them in stores, as if their English, which was entirely fluent, somehow needed extra time to land. They were ignored at parent-teacher conferences. Their business was dismissed by neighbours until it was the most reliable establishment on their block and had put 2 kids completely through college. My parents taught me something very early. The loudest thing you can do is succeed quietly. Let people project their assumptions onto you. Let them feel comfortable in their certainty about who you are. Then let the work speak when the time comes. And honestly, I liked being underestimated by people like the Hargroves. There was a strange freedom in it. Being invisible to someone means they never try to take anything from you. What I hadn't fully calculated was the slow accumulating cost of sitting at that table and swallowing it. Week after week, year after year, the cost of performing smallness. Chapter 3. The dinners, chapter by chapter. Let me take you through some specific moments because I think the pattern matters and I don't want you to just take my word for it. Christmas dinner, year 2. Patricia gave everyone else in the family a card with a thoughtful gift card or personal gift inside. She gave me a gift basket from a discount grocery chain. The card said for the home. Daniel's sister got a cashmere sweater. His cousin got a spa gift card. I got a basket with dried pasta, a jar of marinara, and a box of crackers. Patricia watched me open it and said, "I wasn't sure what you liked yet." I thanked her. I smiled. Daniel squeezed my hand. Easter dinner, year 3. Robert made a toast to the Hargrove family and looked deliberately, slowly around the table at every face except mine as he said it. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could have called him out for, just deliberately enough that the woman sitting next to me caught it and gave me a tiny glance that meant she'd seen it too. We both looked away. Daniel's birthday dinner, year 3. Patricia put together a slideshow. Photos of Daniel through the years, childhood, college, family vacations, beautiful, thoughtful. And tucked into the middle of it, with music playing softly under it, photos of Daniel and Courtney, on what appeared to be a trip to Santorini, described in the caption as one of Daniel's happiest adventures. She had to have chosen those photos with her own hands. She had to have looked at them, decided they captured her son looking happy, and included them in a slideshow she was playing for her current daughter-in-law. In the car afterward, Daniel said she must have just grabbed old photos without going through them carefully. He said it without making eye contact. I think we both knew that wasn't what happened. Summer dinner, year 4. I mentioned, carefully and vaguely, that I was working on a renovation project, a property near the arts district I was updating. Robert laughed, not meanly. The comfortable, easy laugh of a man who has never needed to take something seriously to feel fine about dismissing it. He said, "A renovation project. Do you actually know what you're doing? Or is this more of a hobby kind of situation?" Patricia said, "Oh, Robert," in a tone that meant she agreed with him completely. I said the project was going very well actually, and asked if anyone wanted more wine. Thanksgiving dinner, year 4, Patricia mentioned that she'd run into Courtney at a charity gala, that Courtney had just been made partner at her firm, that she looked absolutely wonderful, still so put together. She delivered this directly to the table, and then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as deliberately warm. The crueler kind of warmth, the kind that says, "I'm not being cruel at all, I'm simply sharing lovely news." I said that was wonderful for Courtney. I asked if the sweet potato casserole needed anything, and I want to ask you something right now, genuinely. In the comments, I'd really like to know. At what point would you have said something? Because I've turned this over 1,000 times. At what point does staying quiet become complicity with your own erasure? Because at the time I truly didn't know what the right answer was. Chapter 4. What I in the filing cabine. About 8 months before everything came apart, I was reorganizing our shared home office. We'd moved in together after the engagement. A nice apartment that was technically mine, but felt neutral in that careful way things feel when two people haven't quite made them a home together yet. I was reorganizing the filing cabinet, not looking for anything, just tidying, and I found a folder that had slipped behind another folder. Inside were some financial documents, nothing alarming on their own, but on top of them was a printed email chain between Daniel and his father, dated about 6 months before we'd gotten engaged. I only needed to read 3 or 4 exchanges before I understood what I was looking at. Robert had asked Daniel point blank whether he thought I was financially stable, not whether I was a good person, not whether I made Daniel happy or treated him well. Whether I was financially stable, specifically, whether I had real means or just ambition. And Daniel had written back, I can still see the exact words on that page. "She does okay. She has her little real estate side thing, but nothing serious. She's not rich, Dad, but I don't care about that. Her little real estate side thing." I set the folder back carefully. I closed the cabinet, I walked to the kitchen, and made a cup of tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time and thought about what it actually means when the person who says they love you chooses, in a private moment with his father, to make you small. Not because he thought it was true. He knew better. He'd heard enough from me to know better. He made me small because it was easier. Because it smoothed something over. Because making me small to his father was the path of least resistance. I didn't bring it up with Daniel. Not then. I should have. But I didn't. I folded it away, the way I had learned to fold things, and I kept going. I kept building. I kept the portfolio growing and the LLC operating and the spreadsheet perfectly updated. But something changed inside me that day. Something got very quiet and very still. The kind of still that isn't peace. It's just everything waiting. Chapter 5. The building now. I need to tell you about the building. The Hargroves had lived in their condominium for about 12 years. It was a nice building, a mid-rise on a well-located street, 12 stories, solid construction, close to a park and a good school district. Patricia had mentioned once, with that breezy casualness she had about money, that the rent had gone up but it was worth it for the address. She'd complained about the management company twice at dinner, once when the lobby renovation took too long, once when she'd had a ceiling leak that took 3 weeks to properly fix. I had been watching that building for 4 years before I bought it. I had actually made an initial offer about 2 years into Daniel's and my relationship, but the owner wasn't ready to sell. When it came back to market 18 months later, the numbers were exactly right, and I moved quickly. I purchased it through one of my LLCs, the same way I purchased everything, at arm's length, professionally, quietly. I want to be very clear about something. I did not buy that building because of the Hargroves. I bought it because it was a sound acquisition in a strong location at a fair price. The fact that the Hargroves lived there was something I had been aware of. Their unit came up in the tenant records during due diligence, and I had made a deliberate decision to proceed anyway and manage it purely as business. My property management company handled all tenant communications, maintenance, lease renewals, complaints, everything. My name appeared nowhere in the direct correspondence. The tenants knew their building had changed ownership. That information is public record. But they had no particular reason to connect Chen Property Group LLC to the woman sitting across from them, eating roasted chicken every Sunday. For 2 years, I owned the building where my in-laws lived and said nothing. Every time Patricia complained about the management company, I listened attentively. Every time Robert grumbled that the rent was highway robbery for what you get, I kept my face perfectly neutral. Every time Patricia praised the new lobby renovation, the one I had personally approved the budget for, I said, "Oh, it does look lovely." Chapter 6. The last Sunday dinner was in February. Cold, grey, the kind of evening where the sky never quite gets dark because the clouds just hold the light down flat. Daniel and I had been in a prolonged rough patch, not explosive, just a sustained low-grade distance, the kind that develops when two people have been slightly not honest with each other for long enough that it becomes the default atmosphere. We weren't fighting. We were living at a slight permanent remove from each other, the way you live with a dull headache that you've stopped noticing. I should have cancelled. I knew when I was getting dressed that I was running on empty, that the reserve I usually kept carefully maintained, the one that allowed me to smile and deflect and perform fine through 3 hours of Sunday dinner, was depleted. But I went anyway, because I had always gone. There were 7 of us. Patricia and Robert, Daniel's sister Brianna with her husband, a family friend named Carl who I'd met perhaps twice, and Daniel and me. Patricia had made lamb with rosemary and roasted root vegetables. The good china was out, the candles were lit. It started the way it always started, pleasantly, the surface warmth of a family that knew its social choreography well. Wine was poured, compliments circulated about the lamb. Robert told a story about a golf trip. Then Carl, who clearly had no idea he was about to step on a live wire, looked at me and said, "Maya, Daniel mentioned you work in real estate. That must be interesting." And before I could answer, before I could even take a breath to form a response, Patricia said, "She sells properties, Carl. It's more of a side income situation. She's very enterprising." She said it with her eyes aimed directly at me. Warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated to sound like a compliment. Robert laughed, his easy, comfortable laugh, and said, "Well, someone's got to sell the small ones, right? Not everybody can make the big plays." He picked up his wine glass, swirled it slightly. "Nothing wrong with starting small, that's how you learn." Carl looked like he regretted asking. I looked at Daniel. He was cutting his lamb, head down. He did not look up. And something in me just released. Not dramatically, not with any heat. It released the way a long-held breath releases. Quietly, completely. I did not say anything at that dinner. I helped clear the plates the way I always did. I thanked Patricia for a lovely evening and meant absolutely none of it. I hugged Brianna, who hugged me back a beat, too long in the way that meant she'd noticed something. I shook Robert's hand. In the car on the way home, Daniel said, "You were quiet tonight." I said, "I know." He said, "Everything okay?" I said, "I'm thinking through something." He turned on the radio. I looked out the window at the city going past. Chapter 7. The latter Monday morning I called my property management team. I told them that Unit 8C at the Meridian Street building was coming up for lease renewal review, and that I wanted to personally review the file before any communications went out. They sent the file over within the hour. I reviewed it carefully. The Hargroves had been month to month for the past 2 years. They'd stopped signing long-term leases, which was their prerogative. The rent, I noted, had actually been below current market rate. During acquisition, I had quietly authorised holding it stable rather than adjusting it to what the unit could genuinely command. I read through everything slowly. Then I opened a blank document. The letter was professional. It was precise. It was, technically, completely standard. A notice of non-renewal effective 60 days from receipt, citing the owner's decision to repurpose the unit, standard commercial language. No editorial. No personal note. The letterhead at the top read Chen Property Group, LLC. I signed it with my full legal name. I emailed it to my management team with instructions to send via certified mail, which was standard procedure for formal notices. Then I closed the laptop, went to the kitchen, made coffee, and stood at the window for a long time looking at the street below. I want to be honest about what I felt. Not triumph. It wasn't triumphant. It was closer to the feeling of finally setting down something very heavy that you've been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. 3 days later, my phone rang. Patricia. I watched the screen, let it ring. Then Daniel called. I answered on the second ring. He said, "Maya, what did you do?" Not a question. The tone of someone who had already been on the phone with his mother. I said, "I sent a standard non-renewal notice to the tenants at 1240 Meridian Street, Unit 8C. That falls entirely within my rights as the property owner." The silence on his end lasted long enough that I could hear traffic in the background from wherever he was standing. He said slowly, "You own that building?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How long?" I said, "About 2 years." Another pause. "Longer this time." He said, "Maya?" I said, "Daniel." How long did you know that what you told your father about my work wasn't true? The silence that followed that question was the most complete silence I'd ever sat inside of. Chapter 8. The Fallop Patricia called 4 more times that evening. Robert called twice. Brianna sent a text that just said, "What is happening?" followed by 5 question marks, which was somehow both alarming and slightly funny. Daniel came home late. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He looked like a person who had spent an entire day in a slow-motion car crash and was only now registering the actual damage. He told me he'd found out about the building about 3 months prior, found a document by accident, and hadn't said anything because he didn't know how to raise it without making everything worse. And things had already been tense, and he'd thought maybe I'd bring it up myself at some point. I asked him about the email, the one from before our engagement, the little real estate side thing. He exhaled. He looked at the table. He said it just came out that way, that he was trying to manage his father's expectations. His father had a way of pressuring him about the people in his life, about status, about whether things were appropriate, and Daniel thought that if his father knew the full picture, he'd treat me differently, in ways that might create other problems. He thought he was protecting me by minimizing me. I said, "You made me small to protect me." He said, "I made me small because I wasn't brave enough to stand up to my own father. And that's on me. I'm sorry, Maya. I am genuinely sorry." He meant it. I could see clearly that he meant it, and that is the part that was hardest of all. It wasn't a lie born from cruelty. It was a failure of courage, and lies you can be furious about. "Cowardice just makes you grieve," I said. "I sat at your mother's table for 5 years. She brought up Courtney at least 7 times that I counted. Your father dismissed my work in front of guests on 3 separate occasions. Your mother gave me a grocery store gift basket for Christmas, while your sister got cashmere. And every single time I looked at you, you squeezed my knee and said they didn't mean it." He didn't say anything. I said, "When did you ever tell her to stop?" "Not in the car afterward." Not in a whispered aside, at the table, looking at her. "Did you ever once tell her to stop?" The answer lived in the silence between us. I want to be completely honest here, because I think this is the part that actually matters. The in-laws' cruelty, as persistent and exhausting as it was something I could locate and manage. People can be cruel. Families can be petty and territorial and small. I had lived through worse. But Daniel knew what I had built, knew it was real and significant and serious. And when the moment came to stand behind it, he chose to make it smaller because that was easier for him. That was the thing that actually cracked something. Not with a sound. Without a sound. Just a slow structural shift that changed everything quietly, the way a foundation changes in winter. Chapter 9. 3 moves and a decision we tried. I want you to know that part too, because it matters to the full picture. We went to couples therapy 3 times a week for 3 months, with a therapist named Dr. Reyes, who had the particular gift of asking questions that sounded gentle and felt like surgery. In those sessions, Daniel talked about growing up in a family where his parents' approval was the currency for everything, for safety, for peace, for the quiet comfort of just being allowed to exist without conflict. He talked about learning early that the path of least resistance was the path worth taking, that keeping his parents happy kept everything else manageable. I talked about what it feels like to be made invisible by the person who is supposed to see you most clearly, about the specific exhaustion of performing smallness, about finding that email and saying nothing, not because I was strategic, but because some part of me already knew what it meant and wasn't ready to look at it fully. Dr. Reyes said at one point that the 2 of us had very different relationships with silence. Daniel used it to avoid conflict. I used it to survive. She said that was worth sitting with. We sat with it. For 3 months, we genuinely tried. Daniel had some hard conversations with his parents that I was not present for. Brianna told me later that her father was mainly quiet through his, which was apparently out of character, and somehow more unsettling than if he'd argued. Patricia apparently cried. These things happened, and I don't want to minimize them. They were real, and they cost Daniel something to do them, and I know that. Patricia called me once during those 3 months and offered what I can only describe as a contextual apology. It was not insincere, exactly, but it was the kind of apology that spends most of its time explaining the years of anxiety about Daniel, the way a mother's protectiveness doesn't always come out the right way, the fact that she'd never truly meant to make me feel lesser. She said she hoped we could start fresh. I listened completely. I thanked her, and I meant the thanks. I said I appreciated her calling. I did not go back to Sunday dinners. The Hargroves had 60 days on the non-renewal notice. They found a new condo in a well-regarded building on the other side of the neighborhood. I heard through Brianna, who texted me periodically throughout all of this and remains the only Hargrove I genuinely like, that Patricia had described the situation to friends as very complicated, management issues, and that they'd simply decided to move somewhere better suited to them. I heard that Robert had told a golf friend that the building had gone downhill. I did not reach out to correct anyone's version of events. The decision to end the marriage was not made in a single moment. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect a dramatic turning point, a final fight, a door slamming. It wasn't that. It was made the way most real, permanent decisions are made, in accumulation, in small, quiet moments that stack up until they become a weight that can't be shifted. There was a Tuesday in April when Daniel mentioned his parents had settled into their new place and seemed genuinely relieved, and I sat watching him be relieved and thought, for him, this is a chapter closing. For me, it isn't a chapter. It's a 5-year record, and records don't close just because the page turns. There was a Sunday in May when Daniel suggested we look at a house together, fresh start, joint investment, something to build toward, and he walked through the kitchen excited about the counter space and the natural light, and I walked behind him watching his excitement, waiting for some answering feelings inside me. What I found instead was hollow clarity, like a room after the furniture's been moved out, clean and echoey and honest. There was a night in June when I sat alone at the kitchen table and made a list, just for myself. On one side, the things that had been genuinely good between us. There were real things on that list. Kindness, humour, years of small attentions. I'm not rewriting history. On the other side, the things that were structural. The things that were true about who we each were and how those truths fit together, or didn't. Some gaps between people aren't flaws you can fix. They're just the accurate shape of the distance between two people. I filed in July. Daniel did not contest it. I think on some level he'd understood for months that the marriage had been over. Structurally. Quietly over. Since the afternoon, I'd found that email and closed the cabinet and said nothing. Everything that came after had been two people trying to renovate something that needed to come down. The prenuptial agreement I had quietly insisted on before the wedding held in its entirety. Patricia had called it unromantic at the engagement dinner where we'd announced it. Robert had raised an eyebrow and said he found it interesting that I'd thought to do it at all. I had smiled and said it was simply practical. It was simply practical. Everything I had built remained mine. Chapter 10, the house. In September, I bought a house. Not an investment property. Not an acquisition. A home. The first home I had ever bought entirely for myself, to live in, for no reason except that I wanted to live there. It was a 1920s craftsman on a tree-lined street with a wide front porch and a small garden that needed attention and a kitchen with more counter space than I'd ever had in my life. I walked through it alone on a Tuesday morning. The light came in through the old windows at an angle, the kind of golden September light that makes even ordinary rooms look like something worth staying in. I stood in the middle of what would be my living room, and I just breathed. I thought about my mother waking at 5:30 to open the dry cleaning steamer every single morning. I thought about my father sitting at the kitchen table, Sunday nights with the ledger book, glasses on, working the numbers by hand. I thought about how they gave me everything they had, and asked for nothing back except that I not waste it. I thought about 5 years of Sunday dinners, about every smile held in place. About the Christmas basket and the Santorini slideshow, and she has her little real estate side thing, and not everybody can make the big plays. About all the times I had looked at Daniel and he had squeezed my knee and looked away. I let myself feel it, all of it, not in a performance, just quietly in that empty room with the light coming in, not rage. Rage burns fast and leaves you empty. Just the full weight of all of it, acknowledged and felt and set down. Then I called my mother. She asked immediately if I was all right. I told her I was better than all right. I described the house, the porch, the garden, the kitchen light. She made a small happy sound that meant she was already picturing it. She said in Mandarin, "A house a person builds alone stands stronger than one held together by someone else's hands." I'm not sure she intended it to land as directly as it did, but it landed exactly right. Closing, direct to camera, I'm sharing this story now, more than a year after all of it, because someone in an online group asked how I'd sat through years of that kind of treatment without breaking. I wrote a response that was too long for the thread, and several people said, "Make a video," so here we are. I want to say a few things clearly before I close. Sending that eviction notice was not the noble option. The Hargroves are older. Finding a new home was genuinely disruptive and stressful for them. I made a decision in the immediate aftermath of real pain, and it had real consequences for real people, and I carry the weight of that. I'm not here to celebrate anyone's hardship, even people who caused mine, but I also want to say this. 5 years. 5 years of carefully calibrated dismissal. 5 years of the cashmere goes to her, and the grocery basket goes to you. 5 years of Courtney's cheekbones, and how enterprising. 5 years of a husband who knew better and stayed quiet because staying quiet was just easier. The building was never the point. The point was a letter on company letterhead with my name at the bottom, my real name, my actual name, attached to something real and significant that I had built with my own work and my own decisions and my own refusal to let anyone else's limitations become mine. That's what the letter was, a signature, finally. I drive the same Honda. I still wear blazers from the consignment shop on 4th Street. I bring store-brand sparkling water to gatherings when I don't feel like researching wine. None of that has changed. None of it needed to. The spreadsheet is still updated every Sunday morning. Just for me now, at my kitchen table, in the house with the good light. If you've made it all the way to the end of this, genuinely, thank you. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever had to perform smallness for people who were comfortable in their certainty about who you were, I want to say, you are not imagining it. The dismissal is real, the weight of it is real, and so is the quiet thing you are building while no one is watching. Let them underestimate you, then let the work speak.